Hello, welcome to this weekly video lecture series on UI and UX design. Let's start with an introduction to UI and UX. UI is the user interface, and UX is the user experience. So what's the difference between these two? I found this quote very helpful when I was first starting out in UI and UX. You can think of the UI as the saddle, the stirrups, and the reins, and UX is the feeling you get while riding a horse. And that is the source of that quote. And I think that really sums up what the difference is between these two. The user interface is what the user sees and touches. The user experience is how the user interacts. What are they doing and why? And how do they feel while doing it? The UX is primarily driven by the user's desire and motivation, and the UI is what lets them accomplish those desires through specific interactive elements. What these both have in common is a focus on the user. Every design decision should be made with the user in mind. What will the user try to do? How can I help the user to do that thing? The user interface should be intuitive and should make the player feel like they are in control and also part of the experience. As a real-world example of this, imagine if you're talking to someone who is driving a car and you ask them to explain what they are doing. They would probably say, I came to a stop sign, so I stopped, and then I turned left. You would probably not hear them say, I came to a stop sign, so I put my foot on the brake pedal, and then I pulled the switch by the steering wheel to turn on the car's turn signal. Then I rotated the steering wheel while I pressed the gas pedal to turn the car as it moved forward. In this example, they are describing the interface rather than the experience. As a game example, you would not want to hear your player say, I wanted to move my character towards the enemy, so I used the arrow keys to steer my character in the right direction. Then I right-clicked on the enemy to attack, and I simultaneously pressed E to use one of my character's abilities to stun the enemy. You don't want the player to be so focused on the interface that they lose sight of the experience that they're having. A much better thing to hear is, I moved into range of an enemy, and I used my stun spell as I started attacking. The interface comprises everything between the user and the game world. This includes the mouse, keyboard, controller, the display, the monitor, and the speakers. The physical input and output are the way that the player physically interacts with the technology. The physical input accepts the player's actions. They might click the mouse button or move the controller thumbstick or press the space button. And then the physical output shows the player the result of that action. The monitor display shows the character moving, and the speakers play the sound of footsteps. The virtual input and output is everything in the virtual user interface. So this includes the on-screen buttons, menus, and sliders for the user's input. And the virtual output is the on-screen heads-up display, stats, or anything that gives the player feedback. This is referred to as the GUI, or the graphical user interface. The virtual input and output varies a lot based on the hardware, as well as the game genre and the target audience. There's a mapping between what the player does and what she sees as a result of that. Every action the player can take is mapped to a reaction that they get as the feedback. The physical mapping is between the physical things that they interact with. The space key is mapped to the character jumping, W is mapped to walking forward, and the right mouse button might be mapped to attack. This is just an example of what a physical mapping might look like. There's also a virtual mapping. The volume slider in an options menu would map to increasing or decreasing the volume. A map icon on the screen might be mapped to opening the map view. And there might be a night vision icon to toggle the night vision on and off. Let's move on to some do's and don'ts of interface design. First, here are some things that you should not do. The interface should never get in the player's way of what they want to accomplish. The interface should never slow the player down. The interface should never confuse or mislead the player. There may be times in a game where you want the player to feel confused or disoriented, but this should come from gameplay rather than from the actual interface itself. The interface should never stop the player's progress. The interface should never block the player's view. The interface should never be unnecessarily repetitive or asking the player to do the same thing over and over on the same screens. Here are some things the interface should do. The interface should require as few actions or steps as possible for repeated tasks. Think of an action the player might need to do over and over, like selling something from their inventory. Require as few steps they need to do to get to the point of selling, so they don't have to repeat those steps over and over each time they sell multiple items. The interface should make the player feel like they're in control. The interface should help the player accomplish their goal. The interface should give all the needed information, and in a way that is easy for the player to find and understand. It can be very frustrating as a player to know that you are looking for a certain piece of information and to not be able to find it anywhere on the screen. The interface should react quickly and appropriately to any action. There's a short period of time that players will accept from when they've pressed a button to when they expect something to happen. And it is very quick in the player's expectation. And if it takes too long, the player will believe that the button is broken. The interface should have pleasing visuals, sound, and tactiles. The tactiles are primarily for the physical interface, having things like the controller vibrating when the player collides with an enemy, or having a touch screen where you can sort of feel the tactile vibration of the screen when you tap something that you're interacting with. And the interface should be intuitive. It should be something the player can understand as soon as they look at it. You shouldn't need a specific tutorial just to teach the player how the interface works. Ideally, you want as much of the interface as possible to be clear as soon as the player looks at it. Let's talk about some elements of an interface, and for this we're going to focus on the heads-up display. Some elements that are very common to see on a heads-up display are health and shield, as well as ammo for a weapon. In the upper corner, you might have the progress of quests and a mini-map. One thing that is often overlooked is feedback happening in the center of the screen. A lot of feedback happens on the heads-up display to let the player know what is happening in the actual gameplay, letting them know how much damage they've done, or if they've had a critical hit, or how much health the enemies have left. This is very useful information for the player to have and is an important element in the heads-up display. Now for a little activity for you to do in your spare time. Next time you are playing a game, take a moment to focus on the UI and think about, is it intuitive? And if so, what makes it intuitive? How does it give the player feedback? How could it be improved? And how are buttons mapped to in-game actions and results? Thank you for watching. Next week, we will talk about flow diagrams.